Welcome back to the STEM Career Accelerator. I'm Bobby Sass, and we're still talking about how to land a new role. In this lesson, we're going to talk more about your resume and actually applying for jobs. Now, I'm not going to overload you with the resume and application in this presentation because I have a handout and worksheets for you that are going to take you really in depth in this stuff. So I'm just going to go over a few things in the lesson to get you started in using that worksheet. Your resume is your career story. And a resume is essentially telling the story of you as a hero. It's your hero's journey, and it's a story that is written for your audience, and your audience needs your help. That's why the hiring manager wants to hire you, is that they need your help, and you are the hero that is going to help them. So, some important things to consider are what is specific about this job role and industry when you're writing your hero's journey, right? Like, you need to make your hero's journey specific to your career story, but always be thinking towards what that means in the context of your new role, your new job, your new industry. Okay. And who is this resume for? Who are you writing your hero's journey for? Who is going to be reading it? Is it going to be HR, the hiring manager, a hiring committee? Is it going to be somebody that you send your resume to who's you're trying to network with because they're in the second circle of the hiring manager? Like think through who is reading this. What is the purpose that this story is being told for? And maybe that means that you need to have several versions of your resume in order to meet each of those needs and reach each of those audiences. Think about what you can do to enhance the role, to enhance the organization, to enhance the entire industry that you're working in, right? Like we're STEM professionals. That's kind of the purpose of what we do. Like we're not there just to necessarily kind of turn the crank and just keep the ball rolling. We're there to innovate, to invent, to make change, to use data and analyze the data and to move forward to solve problems and really we are at the forefront of science and engineering. That's what we do as STEM professionals, right? So how can you help who is reading this resume? How are you going to help them by enhancing this role, this organization, the industry? What is that? What problem is that going to solve? How are you going to take them from pain to paradise, right? Like they're in some sort of pain. That's why they're advertising for this role. Like they've got a pain point. Find out what that pain point is and figure out how you're going to resolve it and take them back to paradise. Here are some basics about resumes. For many of us, resumes feel really overwhelming. And I think one of the reasons that they feel overwhelming is that we put too much stock into a resume. And that's because oftentimes we're just relying on the resume, right? Like if you remember the previous lesson, I talk about how hiring managers can cast a wide net, and that means they're going to advertise a job online, and a gazillion people are going to apply to the job, and they're going to use automated tracking systems, ATS systems, to go through all those resumes. HR is going to rate all the candidates, and there's going to be a stack of resumes of maybe 10 people or even 3 people that HR hands over to the hiring manager at any given time. And that could have come out of a stack of 1,000 resumes, right? So how how is it that you can cut through this process? Well, first of all, I think the thing is to understand that the resume is important, but networking is more important. But still, a good resume is something that is going to be kind of fundamental in the job search process. So let's make sure that you have a good resume. We might even be able to get you to have a great resume. But first, you need to understand the basic types of resumes. There's not just one type of resume. There's a chronological resume, a functional resume, and a combination, a hybrid of those two. Chronological resume basically walks through your career history from most recent to the oldest. And chronological resumes may just be the last 10 years. If you've got, many years of experience, then maybe the last 10 years is most relevant. Maybe you don't need a 3-page resume in order to capture the last 25 years of work. And then a functional resume is a little bit less common. The chronological is the most common type of resume. A functional resume, what it tends to do is focus on your skills and your achievements. And so it may not actually be a listing job by job of, from this year to this year, I worked at this job and these are the things that I did. And then from this year to that year, this is the job that I had and these are the things that I did. That's a chronological resume. A functional resume may be like from 2005 to 2010, I worked in these types of roles and I had these job titles, right? You may kind of blend a whole package of years where you may have had four jobs in the course of those 5 years, and you've packaged that all together into one section from 2005 to 2010, and then you do another section from 2010 to 2015, right, and then 2015 to 2020. You might package it that way, and that's a functional resume. Or your resume may be focused on having more bullet points on your skill sets or the typical types of problems that you've solved or the achievements. What things can you quantify? What things can you demonstrate that say, hey, I've made these massive changes in my industry, in my company. These are the things that I achieved, and that's how your resume is functionally focused instead of chronologically focused. But the best resumes are really a combination of these two. I think that my preferred style of a resume is one that has both a focus on skills and calling out the skills when it makes sense. Don't just list a bunch of skills. Lists and resumes are deadly. Lists are not what you want to do. Lists are not a way to hit keywords. Ultimately, somebody's going to read that resume, and if you have wasted their time by just having a list of keywords that are related to skills or job duties, that is not going to interest the hiring manager. So you want to have something that blends your skills, your achievements, and a chronological listing of the employment that you had because let's face it, chronological is the prevailing type of resume, so most people are used to seeing a chronological resume. One of the reasons that the functional resume tends to be preferred is when you have gaps in employment. Now, we all get gaps in employment. They happen for various reasons. Oftentimes, they are for reasons that we feel emotionally negative about, like we lost a job either because we were fired or laid off, and that feels emotionally negative to us. And so we don't want to highlight that by having a chronological resume. We maybe had a physical health or a mental health issue and we needed to take time off from work, or we needed to take care of a loved one, or we had kids and we wanted to focus on our family. Those are all reasons why there might be gaps in employment. We are human, and at the end of the day, you need to decide whether you want to work for a company or a manager that respects the fact that you are human, or that is like, oh, we can't accept any of those things. You need to work, 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 and hopefully you don't have any gaps in your resume because, well, if you do, that signals that you're not a good worker. If that's the prevailing mentality at the organization, then maybe it's not the place you want to work. I don't know you uh, necessarily that well, but you need to decide for yourself where your feelings take you with those sorts of situations. Now, the chronological resume, it's okay if you have gaps in your resume. There are various ways of dealing with gaps in your resume. For instance, one thing you can do is you can say that you took a sabbatical. It does not have to be an official sabbatical. It could be one that you chose to take, and then later on, in retrospect, you're like, wow, I did some great things during my time off from work. I went to various seminars, or I took this certification, or you traveled and you learned things in your travel. There's all sorts of ways that you can blend in a gap in employment into an overall resume. And fundamentally, gaps in employment are becoming more common. The hiring managers in general are becoming more accepting of gaps in the resume. It's something that's easier to explain, and that's because we do work under the newer career model now. Kind of this old school boomer model of like you're gonna work, 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 never take sick days, never take time off for yourself or your family, never take extended time off, and you're gonna retire from this company after 30 years, right? Like that's the old style. That's not the new style. So newer resumes reflect the newer work model and career model and the way that things are done nowadays. So some more basics, right? The length of resume is something that comes up often when we're talking about rewriting your resume. Some of this depends on your target industry and organization, and typically the length of your resume is mostly a reflection of your years of experience. So let's talk about the guidelines for years of experience and length of resume. Generally, if you have less than 5 years of work experience, you should have no more than one page resume. Remember, this is a guideline, this is not a definite, but oftentimes, if you are either a recent graduate or someone that's new in the industry or graduated and had one or two jobs and you've worked for only 5 years or less, you probably only need a one-page resume. Anything longer than that, and you're trying to look more or include more than you need, look more important or include more than you really need to, and that's not necessarily going to reflect well with a hiring manager. Instead, you want to enrich that one-page resume so that that one-page resume says what it needs to say to the hiring manager, and they're like, "Oh, wow, I love this person." Because the reality is oftentimes the hiring manager only gets through the first third of the first page before they make a decision about moving on to the next application. So we've got to think about that first third of the resume, really, the first third of the first page of the resume, really hitting home with the hiring manager. And then if you go on to more than one page, sometimes the hiring manager is not going to care. They're not going to go on from there. And so this is why, especially for those who have less than 5 years experience, one page is enough. 5 to 10 years of experience, you might consider adding a second page or going longer than one page. If you've got more than 10 years of experience, then a two-page resume, especially in STEM professions where you may have some publications that you want to include in there, or you have some highly specialized certifications that you need to include. Those sorts of things mean that oftentimes we need to run into 2 pages because we don't want to do something ridiculous like have 6-point font in our resume in order to fit it into one page or have no print margins on the page or those sorts of things. We don't want to do that. You still want it to be a formal document, a reasonable document that is, something that you would normally look at on a day-to-day basis. So it needs to be, you know, 10 or 12 point font. It needs to be single spaced or one and a half spaced, and it needs to be a typical font style, Times New Roman, Calibri, something that's legible, nothing fancy. You don't need a bunch of graphics and art on it. Uh, you know, a basic resume should be 1 to 2 pages. Um, that is a little different, however, for academia and government. This is really guidelines more for the uh, the industry. For academia and government, it highly depends on the university or college or the agency or the laboratory that you're applying to. If you're someone who has a PhD and a list of important publications, that is definitely going to push you beyond 2 pages. If you're applying for a government job, federal jobs or state jobs, they often require that you have very long resumes that really spell it out for HR so that they can rate each candidate and qualify you for the position. This is especially true of the way that the federal hiring system works. So the way to think about this, though, in the application and the length of your resume is that oftentimes you do a redundant resume. Oftentimes you submit an online application format resume, which is you go through all of the different fields, all the different blocks, and you're inputting your your employer name, and then in the next block you put in the dates of employment, and then next one the address, the phone number, so on and so forth. Put in your job duties, all of that, right? That can be a much more extensive version of your resume if needed for, say, a federal application. And then you can still submit a PDF and upload a PDF of your resume. And that might be just a two-pager. That might be because both of those will go to the hiring manager if you're qualified for the job, both the extended resume in the standard application and the PDF document that is your resume, two-pager. That will also go. And the hiring managers will often appreciate that you submitted a nice, concise, formatted, standard two-page resume because That's what they would prefer to go through. They don't necessarily want to go through all of the extended language that's needed in order to make it through the federal HR, the Federal Human Resources, or make it through applicant tracking systems in order to get that shorter resume in front of the hiring manager. And that shorter resume will be compelling. It will have what it needs to have in order to say to the hiring manager, I'm the person for this job. Before you write your resume, there are a couple of exercises that I'd like you to do, and those are captured in the worksheet that you can download. One of them is to envision the ideal candidate. Envisioning the ideal candidate is not about saying, "Oh, there's this ideal candidate and like I could never achieve that." Well, that's true because you're never ideal. We're never perfect. We're humans. We're full of flaws. We're full of imperfections. No one person is ever going to meet all of the particular preferred qualifications for any specific job. It's so unlikely that will ever happen. So what what you want to try to do though is you want to try to envision the ideal candidate that does meet all of that. And that person isn't you, but what you then do later is after you envision this ideal candidate, after you go through this exercise of figuring out who this person is, what they're about, what their career story is, then you can analyze it and compare it to your story, and you can take an analytical approach and you can consider the ideal candidate, compare it to yourself, develop a specific list of keywords and key phrases that blend the ideal candidate story with your story. And then you can refer to your skill set table and compare it to this list. And then you compare this list of keywords and key phrases that blends the ideal candidate with your story, with your skills, and look at the job application and the description of the job and the qualifications for the job. And then you can rewrite your resume so that it captures what is ideal, but what is real for you, and get it into a great language package to put into your resume. This is the worst part of the modern job search process. Online applications are hard work. Frankly, online applications are a pain. They are a major obstacle. They are really difficult sometimes. Sometimes the application fails after you've just input a bunch of data. You just feel like you're sending your information off into the ether and you never hear anything back. Sometimes you don't even get a confirmation email that your resume and your application were received. Oftentimes you never hear back that somebody else has gotten the job, that you weren't selected. Online applications are just challenging on many levels. So one of the ways you can simplify things is create a procedure for yourself. One of the ways that I like to approach it is you search for jobs on Google or Indeed or Monster or company websites or agency websites or university websites. You go through and you search for jobs and create a spreadsheet, put all those jobs into that spreadsheet, and then you prioritize applying to each of those jobs, and you prioritize based on when it's due and how desirable the job is, right? And so when you can balance these two things and say, oh, well, this application is due tomorrow or it's due in a week, then that's going to set some priorities, right? But what if you have a job that's an application that's due tomorrow, but it's not highly desirable, and you have a job that's highly desirable, but it's due in 3 days? Which one do you prioritize? Setting up a system like this and a procedure like this is going to allow you to make those sorts of decisions and to stick to them because it'll be set up in a spreadsheet or in a SaaS tool, a services software tool, in order for you to create some general organization to things, to track your progress. And, that might look something like this, where it's just real simple and you have the job title, the application due date, the date completed, the notes, the links for the application. Set it up like this. and put it in an order of priority so that you know which ones you need to apply to, when you need to apply to them, and when you've completed it, right? This is a great way to keep things in order because most applications are online. Whether or not you are applying for the job because or you know the hiring manager or someone's in your network, you're still probably going to have to do an online application. That's still the way the world works. And if you have things in a spreadsheet or in a SaaS tool, data entry becomes much easier. And I explain more of this in the downloadable worksheet. There's also a downloadable worksheet that talks a bit about various types of artificial intelligence and add-on software and all kinds of tools that are available out there now to assist you in the job application process. Now, when you want to create something that's a little bit easier for data entry, then you basically I like to have my own spreadsheet. And you can use an automation tool to do this, but I like to have a spreadsheet set up first. You can actually use the spreadsheet to set up the automation tool as well, but the spreadsheet will basically have all of those key typical functional kinds of things that you need to have in there. The employer name, so who did you work for? Right now I'm coming to you live from New Terrain Academy. That's one of my current employers. The address, city, state, country, position, title, technical trainer, career coach, owner, uh, supervisor name. Well, I'm self-employed in this instance, so on and so forth. List out your job duties. Um, you know, some applications need to know what equipment you use, reason for leaving. Like whatever is going on, you need to have all of these different points included in the resume, and then you can just copy and paste these over into the online application. It makes it easier than having to type things over and over and over, and it lets you set up multiple versions of the spreadsheet for different jobs that you're applying to because you do need to adapt each application to the specific job. You don't want to just use the same descriptions over and over. You need to adapt them, need to meet the keywords. But the basics here are captured in this first column. So use those basics to set up your spreadsheet if you choose to go this route. All right, cover letters. Boy, oh boy, uh, cover letters are a real bear. Um, a lot of times, cover letters aren't required anymore. They may be optional. You can make your own decision, but generally, if a cover letter is optional, I will not send one because they usually don't get read, and sometimes sending more is not better because you may say something in your cover letter that actually is a turn off to the hiring manager. So you don't want to do that. Um, but if you do need to write a cover letter, if it's a requirement or you really feel like you need to write one, here's some tips. Be concise. Do not write a 3-page cover letter. Cover letter should be 1 page and no longer. There's almost never a reason to write a longer cover letter. There are some types of jobs where you need to write a longer cover letter, but remember the cover letter is not a summary of your career. It is to highlight certain things. Okay? If you just rewrite your resume in prose and call that a cover letter, you have not written a cover letter. A cover letter is not an executive summary of your resume. A cover letter is to tell them about why you want this job, why you're right for this job, to get them clued in to some of your key achievements. When you write this cover letter, you need to use a relaxed but professional tone. So don't make it too flowery and also don't make it too robotic. You want to show enthusiasm. You want to show excitement. You want to show your passion for the organization and the role, but you don't necessarily want to state the obvious. I'm enthusiastic about this job. I'm excited about this job. I'm passionate about my career. Those blanket statements are so overused, so overdone, and no hiring manager and nobody at HR wants to read those exact sentences in a cover letter. You want to be genuinely interested in specific aspects of the job and you want to highlight those related keywords. Some of that needs to show up in your cover letter. Do not take that to mean that your cover letter needs to include every single keyword from the job duties description or the application. That's not what this means. It means that there are some specific aspects that you are generally interested in and you want to capture that in your cover letter. describe how you would be a good fit for the organizational culture, mission, and values. So be sure to look those things up. Go to their website, talk to people in your network, understand that, first of all, they have a culture, that they have a mission, that they have values. And by talking to people in your network who work at the organization or have worked at that organization, you'll be able to know how closely they actually stick to those things, right? And if that's all good, then you want to make sure that you want to capture in your cover letter how you fit in with their culture, their mission, and their values. You also really want to emphasize how you relate to their clients and customers, right? Ultimately, your job is either to service an internal or an external client or customer. And that is the same in industry, academia, and government. In industry, it's a little bit more obvious. In academia, you're serving your students, you're serving society, you're serving the community, and in government, you are serving the public, right? Those are your clients and customers in those instances. And you want to make sure that your future employer understands that you know that you're not just going there to earn a paycheck, you are going there to serve a client or a customer. So make sure that you demonstrate how you relate to those folks. This is the cover letter that you don't want to write because almost every bad cover letter that somehow the applicant thinks it sounds good because it's what everyone writes, this is what you don't want to do. To whom it may concern. First of all, be specific. If you know the hiring manager's name, use their name. Here's another pointless cover letter. Here's everything I just listed in my resume. I'm super enthusiastic about this job, and you know how you know that? It's because I just wrote it here. I'm a great fit for this role because, well, I'm me, and I can't wait to meet you. Sincerely, me, not hired. Don't write a cover letter like this. And this example right here is precisely why cover letters are not even all that common anymore, is because too many cover letters look like this. They don't really convey the things that they need to convey. They are becoming less useful, and they're not necessarily relied upon in the hiring process. So if you don't have to send one, I recommend that you don't send one. Ultimately, the decision is yours to make. Thanks for being here for this lesson, and I will see you in the next session.